It is estimated that 1.1 million were exterminated here by the end of World War II.
In the mid-20th century, there was a man who transformed an abandoned military camp into the most sophisticated killing machine humanity had ever witnessed. A place where more than 1 million entered and never came out. He was not a killer by his own hand, but the cold mind behind every blueprint of death. His name was Rudolf Höss. To understand him, we will follow 3 stages. When leafing through the archives of the early 20th century, the name Rudolf Franz Ferdinand Höss emerges as a figure both seemingly ordinary and chillingly dangerous. He was born on November 25, 1901, in the resort town of Baden-Baden in southwestern Germany, a place famed for its hot springs and high society, not as the cradle of a man who would later become a symbol of a colossal killing machine. Höss grew up in a strict conservative Catholic family, where parental words were almost law. His father, a former soldier, harbored the wish that his son would become a priest, a pure path of service to God. Yet, in a cruel twist of fate, young Rudolf was led to a very different kind of church, one where the altar was a gas chamber, and the ritual was industrialized killing. From his teenage years, Höss was thrust into the shocks of history. At just 15, while many of his peers were still in school, Rudolf joined the German army during World War I. He was sent to brutal fronts, from the burning deserts of the Middle East to the frozen expanses of the Eastern Front. These close brushes with death forged in him a cold detachment and iron discipline, but also numbed whatever humanity he had left. After the war ended, Germany fell into political and economic chaos. The empire collapsed, and young veterans like Höss wandered a land rife with instability. In this turmoil, he found his new family, the Freikorps, a far-right paramilitary force notorious for its brutal campaigns against communists, suppression of uprisings, and ruthless treatment of those they saw as enemies of the nation, including Jews and other minority groups. Within just a few years, this path would draw Rudolf Höss deeper into the darkness, laying the foundation for the road that would lead straight to Auschwitz. In 1923, a turning point altered the course of his life. Höss and his accomplices took part in the assassination of Walter Cato, a school teacher accused of betraying the nation. The incident caused a public sensation and became a badge of honor in far-right circles. The court sentenced him to 10 years in prison. But Höss served only 4, freed under political amnesties. This was the first time justice stepped aside in the face of extremist ideology. Upon his release, Höss entered a new phase. He came into contact with Heinrich Himmler, the future head of the SS, who recognized in Höss a valuable asset, organizational skill, machine-like discipline, and, above all, a chilling indifference in carrying out orders. In 1934, Höss officially joined the SS, Schutzstaffel. This was the iron arm of the Nazi Party, responsible for security, purges, and the operation of concentration camps. He was immediately assigned to Dachau, where he learned the trade of a camp commandant, a trade whose chief skill was turning human beings into statistics. He later moved to Sachsenhausen as deputy commandant, directly involved in expanding the camp model and optimizing forced labor. In May 1940, Heinrich Himmler gave Höss the most important assignment of his life, to become the first commandant of Auschwitz. At the time, the camp was just a small detention site for Polish political prisoners, but under Höss's hand, it rapidly transformed into a center for mass extermination. This was the turning point that elevated him from an unknown SS officer to the architect of the most efficient killing machine in human history. Within just a few years, Höss would not merely be a camp commandant. He would become the designer of a killing process that could operate like an industrial assembly line, with Auschwitz-Birkenau as the factory and human beings as the raw material. The steps to power. In the early 1920s, Germany was still gasping for air after its defeat in World War I. Hyperinflation raged, unemployment spread like wildfire, and street clashes were a daily occurrence. Amid this chaos, Rudolf Höss found a new ideal, one he believed could save Germany, but which in reality opened the door to crimes without precedent in human history. In 1922, he joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, then still a small but radical movement, calling for the restoration of the glory of the German nation by eliminating all those deemed impure. Here, Höss met figures who would later become pillars of the regime and gradually built a network of connections that would help him rise. The atrocities at Auschwitz. Surviving SS secret records reveal that when Rudolf Höss assumed command of Auschwitz in May 1940, it was nothing more than a row of dilapidated Polish army barracks holding a few hundred prisoners. Yet under his hand, within just 2 years, it had become the capital of death. Höss never wielded the knife or pulled the trigger himself, but he was the architect of a vast, killing assembly line. In post-war interrogations, he described restructuring Auschwitz as though discussing a construction project, expanding prisoner blocks, installing rail tracks directly into the camp's yard, erecting high-voltage electric fences, all to optimize the flow of people in and corpses out. Auschwitz II, Birkenau, was Höss's masterpiece. It could process tens of thousands of people each day, from reception, selection, and execution to cremation, all carried out seamlessly like an industrial production line. Höss's most innovative breakthrough was the decision to introduce Zyklon B into the gas chambers. Initially, executions were carried out by shooting or by using carbon monoxide from engine exhaust. But after testing on Soviet POWs, Höss discovered that Zyklon B, a pesticide containing hydrogen cyanide, could kill hundreds of people in mere minutes, requiring no firing squads and minimal manpower. He ordered the construction of gas chambers disguised as communal shower rooms. Prisoners were told to undress for disinfection, locked inside, and SS men poured Zyklon B pellets through small vents in the roof. Within minutes, the screams faded, leaving only a suffocating silence. The corpses were then transported to crematoria or burned in open-air pits. The ashes were crushed, dumped into rivers, or mixed into fertilizer for SS farms. In his diary, Höss boasted that Auschwitz could kill and process 2,000 people in under 24 hours, and he regarded this as a technical achievement. Yet the horror of Auschwitz extended beyond the gas chambers. Those fortunate enough to survive initial selection were sent to forced labor, hauling stones, digging earth, building facilities, or working in armaments factories and coal mines. They toiled 12 to 14 hours a day in all weather, subsisting on a watery soup and a crust of stale bread. Many collapsed from exhaustion and were shot or beaten to death on the spot by SS guards. Disease swept through the camp: typhus, tuberculosis, scabies, and dysentery from the lack of clean water. The gravely ill were often sent directly to the gas chambers to make room. Twins and prisoners with unusual physical traits were singled out for medical experiments by Dr. Josef Mengele and the SS medical staff, injected with chemicals, subjected to surgeries without anesthesia, or subjected to grotesque transplants. Höss knew of these activities, yet not only did he fail to stop them, he considered them part of the mission. According to testimony at the Nuremberg trials, more than 1.1 million people were murdered at Auschwitz, the vast majority Jews, with the rest comprising Poles, Roma, political prisoners, and Soviet POWs. To Höss, they were nothing more than figures in a report, tabulated to the nearest 1,000, like inventory on a factory production line. The most chilling aspect was not merely the death toll, but the way he transformed mass murder into a perfectly administered process, clean, efficient, and leaving behind no waste in either material or witnesses. Arrest, trial, and execution. In the spring of 1945, the Nazi regime collapsed. Those who had once held absolute power now scattered like rats, fleeing a sinking ship. Rudolf Höss knew all too well that Auschwitz had become the ultimate symbol of the Holocaust, and that his name was on the list of the most relentlessly hunted war criminals. He fled, adopting the name Franz Lang and posing as a farm laborer. For nearly a year, Höss hid in the rural north of Germany, working the fields by day and sleeping in a cattle shed at night. But the scars of war, his rigid soldier's posture, and the cold, unblinking eyes betrayed the truth of his past. In March 1946, British military police tracked him down. According to accounts from the men who carried out the arrest, the scene was unforgettable. British troops burst into the farmhouse in the dead of night, dragged him outside in his nightclothes, and threw him onto the frozen ground. When he realized he had been found, Höss said nothing, but beads of sweat appeared on his brow despite the biting cold. One British officer later recalled that they had to use the butt of a rifle to force him to reveal his true identity. And when the name Rudolf Höss left his lips, everyone present understood they were standing before the monster of Auschwitz. He was taken immediately to Nuremberg, where he served as a witness against other former Nazi leaders. Ironically, Höss's calm, matter-of-fact testimony detailing how he had organized the murder of over 1 million people sent shivers even through the defense attorneys. In 1947, Höss was extradited to Poland to stand trial before the Polish Supreme Court. The proceedings lasted several weeks, with hundreds of witnesses, including survivors of Auschwitz. They recounted scenes of children herded into gas chambers, their cries silenced within minutes, and the sickening smell of burning flesh drifting across the camp. Höss sat there, his face almost expressionless, occasionally jotting notes, as if listening to a production report. The death sentence was handed down on April 2, 1947. But justice for Höss would not come in the form of any ordinary execution. It would come at the very place where he had orchestrated his crimes. On April 16, 1947, Rudolf Höss was hanged at Auschwitz, next to the gas chamber where hundreds of thousands had perished. Witnesses say that as he mounted the gallows, the icy composure he had shown in court was gone. Beneath his feet lay the blood-soaked soil of countless victims. Around him, former prisoners stood in silence. No one wept. No one offered forgiveness. Only a heavy, unspoken understanding that justice had at last been served. When the trapdoor opened, ending the life of Rudolf Höss, many present breathed a sigh of relief. The man who once boasted of killing 2,000 people in a single day took only a few seconds to vanish into oblivion. And this time, there was no industrial process to save him from the fate he had dealt to millions of others. 5. Darkness and memory. The story of Rudolf Höss is not merely the biography of one man, but a testament to how a society can create and nurture those who commit atrocities. He was not an uncontrollable madman. On the contrary, Höss was the embodiment of discipline, efficiency, and rationality warped by an inhuman ideology. That is what made him so dangerous. His crimes were not acts of impulse, but the product of cold calculation and systematic management. Under Höss's command, Auschwitz became the ultimate symbol of humanity's capacity for destruction when morality is replaced by orders and statistics. More than 1 million lives vanished simply because an ideology regarded human beings as raw material for a racial purification assembly line. Today, standing before the ruins of Auschwitz, one remembers not only the pain and loss, but also a lesson that never grows old. Evil does not always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes it hides behind a neatly pressed uniform, a calm voice, and cold administrative reports. And if society lets down its guard, the death machines Höss once built can return, reborn in new forms.